Welcome to this edition of the Car Seat. It's a great pleasure to welcome Charles Borden here, who is a visiting fellow at CARR, but also works in private practice, specializing in the standards in public life, but also teaches courses in government ethics. Charles, welcome to the Car Seat. Many people say that regulation of public life, standards of public life, have witnessed a process of codification, increasing sort of politicization. Is that a global trend?
Well, thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here. And to answer your question, yes, I think it is actually a global trend, or at least maybe we're at the beginning of a global trend. I think, the regulation of government ethics and standards of conduct in public life have been something that's been quite well developed in the United States for quite some time. You've had a significant explosion in ethics regulation. Starting really in the 1960s, you had a tremendous amount of attention paid to ethical issues like the revolving door, lobbying, gifts to public officials and the like, going on 50 years now. That's something that I see in my practice every day. I think what we're beginning to see right now, though, is a similar process, a similar sort of codification happening around the world, essentially as like many other things, as U.S. law, U.S. traditions seem to be being picked up by other countries, and in particular, I think we've seen some very some of the practices of K Street in Washington are starting to replicate themselves in Brussels and in London and elsewhere, and that's led to sort of an increased attention, I think, both by the media and by regulators on these issues, and increased regulation, and we've seen some fairly significant regulatory developments in a number of European capitals and at the European Commission over the last 12 to 18 months.
And what would you say are the drivers for this development? Is it just scandals? Is it something else? Development of an industry of standard watchers?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one is the scandal reform dynamic, I think, is always present. I think the thing about government ethics and standards of conduct in public life is that they're the things that the media likes to write about. And so these are the kinds of things that when you have some sort of ethics scandal, whether it's the Jobs for Generals scandal in the UK or the Werity affair, some of the other things we've seen in the UK over the last few years, or the various sort of scandals in the US in the early part of this century, Abramoff and the like, that's always going to be something the media is going to write about, and there's always going to be political pressure for reform, for some sort of hard law regulation to address the. And so, yes, I think that's part of it. I think you've seen more scandals in this area, and that's led to some of this codification or additional regulation in the space. I do think that the rise of groups, ethics watchdogs and the like, who are focused on these issues helps drive it. It help push this issue, to the top of the media consciousness. You've got groups like Transparency International and others who are right now paying a lot of attention to these issues and have definitely been raising them. I'd also say, the same sort of process we've seen in other areas where the OECD is playing a very important role, and they were sort of a driver of anti-corruption legislation, 20 years ago now. About 10 years ago, they began really focusing on this space and suggesting, putting out principles for their members to adopt in terms of regulation in this area. We've actually just seen in Ireland, basically new legislation more or less mirroring the OECD principles. So I think, again, these sorts of institutions also have helped drive the process.
You work in different jurisdictions. I mean, are there also traditional national differences that sort of come out when one sort of navigates this field?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I see in my practice as an American lawyer is we have a federal system of government, and many things relating to government ethics are regulated very much at the local level, and so you get very individualized regimes at every level of government in the U.S. And I think certainly outside, if you're crossing borders, I think the nature of differences in industries like government relations and public affairs, different types of governmental structures, a parliamentary structure versus a non-parliamentary structure, all of that change leads to differences in terms of how ethics are regulated and what sort of the expectations are. I'd say another thing that probably makes a big difference, honestly, is the nature of government contracting and essentially the franchise. in the U.S., if you look at a lot of the scandals that have sort of driven ethics regulation, they come out of the defense industry, and the defense industry in the United States obviously is significantly bigger than it is in pretty much anywhere else in the world. And so I think obviously that kind of difference also it has an impact in terms of the regulation in this space.
And in terms of sort of the key topics that currently defines the field standards in public life, what are sort of the key issues there?
Well, I think there are a couple of ones that I would sort of put at the top of the list. I mean, I think one is this issue over sort of the changing nature of the public sector workforce. I mean, one of the big issues you've seen in the last 15 years in the United States is the rise of different categories of public employees, not just full-time employees, but folks who are part-time employees or folks who are not employees at all, but rather government contractors performing what have previously been basic government functions, and figuring out how an ethics architecture needs to adapt to sort of that changing workforce, I think is a very big issue. It is in the United States, and I think it's going to be increasingly a big one elsewhere as people start thinking about standards in public life. I think of one that's getting a lot of attention right now in Europe. You've seen it in Germany, you've seen it in Switzerland, you've seen it in the UK, is what's usually called the revolving door, but it's the idea of regulators leaving the public sector and then promptly going to work for a company or a trade association that they used to regulate. And that has been a big issue in the United States for a long time. I mean, there was many jokes back in the over the years about Boeing and Raytheon and various other defense contractors having sort of people coming in and out of government constantly, and it was sort of actually a very big revolving door case in the U.S. Is sort of all about Boeing employees going to work for the Reagan administration, I think that's now there's a lot of media attention to that phenomenon in Europe, and I think that's going to be an issue that folks are looking at. I'd say another issue, and it sort of relates to this revolving door thing, is the issue, and it's been something that's I think more common in Europe for a long time, but again something that people may be paying attention to now is sort of outside activities of public servants. When you've got folks who are either in a part-time public sector position, or they've got they're allowed to keep sort of various outside activities, outside directorships, things like that. I think there's a greater attention paid to those sorts of activities and to what extent do they create sort of conflicts of interest. I think that's something that people if you want to sort of take a step back, I think the core of a lot of ethics regulation can be sort of looked at as a two masters problem. And the idea that there's a concern that people who are supposedly working for the public sector may also have divided loyalties and may be responsive to some sort of private interest. And I think all of the issues I just sort of identified are ones that kind of go to the core of that particular tension. And so I think those are the issues that people are really grappling with right now.
And enforcement is often said to be a key problem. We can always have beautiful standards, but then ultimately we can't do anything about it, or people have to fall on their sword, even regardless of whether a regulator speaks. Is that
I think enforcement is an issue. This is a difficult area to enforce because you're usually, it's one thing to try to do enforcement in sort of pure corruption cases where you've got a quid pro quo. It's another thing to sort of do enforcement and actually have criminal enforcement in things like lobbying or revolving doors or the like. It's much sort of a much harder thing to do, and so I think it is an area where typically sort of the civil enforcement is somewhat underdeveloped. I think where really you tend to see sanction, or when you see in this space, is sort of more of a soft law type phenomenon, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier. It's the media likes to write about these stories. They're interesting stories. They're front page news. The New York Times currently has two reporters who cover money and politics, and that's their beat. It's as a result, you do get a lot of public approbation about these sorts of matters, and the media sanction, the reputational risk, really I think probably is where you see a lot of the bite.
And finally, what do you think are the consequences of all this codification, politics of government ethics? I mean, people do write about the consequences for career selection, for those wanting to enter public life and so on.
I think there are probably two big consequences, honestly, neither one may be particularly good. I think one is that there is a real cost in terms of getting people to serve in government as a result of these rules. There's a cost in terms of just essentially the hard law part of it, which is that frequently, as in the U.S., if people are looking to serve in government, complying with various financial disclosure or conflict of interest rules can impose such a cost to them in terms of just their net worth or their ability to sort of to sort of maintain the profession that they've been in for a long time, that they just don't serve, and so you don't get the kind of expertise in the government that you might want. A good area where this is happening, for example, would be say cybersecurity issues, where obviously cybersecurity is a very important issue. You need people who have a background in this. Many of these people work in the tech industry. A lot of their net worth is often tied up in things like options and restricted stock and the like, where going to go work for the federal government is going to cost them to forfeit a huge chunk of their net worth. Many people are very public-minded and they'll do it, but it's certainly going to have a cost. And I think just more broadly, people also, there's when it comes to sort of ethics regulation and this whole process, there are people who just opt out just because they don't want to go through the process. It's not that they can't comply with the financial disclosure or the conflict of interest rules, but just the process itself is so challenging and demoralizing that they don't do it, and that's a cost. I think the other issue or other consequence of sort of increased attention and regulation in the space is essentially legitimacy. I mean, a lot of ethics regulation or regulation of public life is sort of aimed at improving trust in government and sort of the most basics of terms. The idea that people fundamentally feel their government is, again, it's ethical and it's serving the public interest. The people who are working there are not serving a private interest. And so the whole point of this regulation at some level is to improve legitimacy. But I think it can actually sometimes have it can inadvertently have the opposite effect, in that you can if you basically have a lot of hard law ethics regulation, even if it's non-criminal, even if it's basically complying with basic sort of code provisions, when someone screws it up, when they basically fail to make a filing, or they fail to they have some sort of technical violation, it seems the ethical violation, it suggests that they are unethical, and it can lead to sort of a broader sense that all these folks are really unethical. They're morally challenged. If there's a quote that a former colleague of mine once said, which is that government ethics in the United States isn't really the ethics you learn in church. It's more like math. And I think that sort of issue is an important one, which is that sometimes when you get sort of a very high level of regulation in the government ethics space, you get people who are essentially making math errors, but they're being seen as having moral failings. And when that happens, I think that can also have a very negative effect on legitimacy.
Charles, thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Martin. It's a pleasure to be here.